Do you know what an Italian is? A happy Jew. Isn't that a great one? Italians are just happy Jews, or Jews are just neurotic Italians.
My guest today is Rabbi Steve Leder. You can find out more about him right now at steveleder.com. That is LEDER.com. But I'd like to start with this from Malika Chopra, author of Living with Intent, My Somewhat Messy Journey to Purpose, Peace, and Joy. She says, Steve Leder's words are a balm to the soul. The beauty of what remains encourages us to confront our feelings about death head on and reminds us not to fear the end of life on earth, but to embrace what it can teach us while we're here. Steve's own stories and experiences are written in that exquisite way that makes it feel as though you're speaking to a good friend. This book is a must-read. I couldn't agree more. That is why I am so happy and proud to have been able to have a personal conversation and bring you this beautiful story view. Thank you, Rabbi Leder, for sharing so much with me.
And that was the moment that I truly understood that I was going to die. And it changed my life for the better. Imagine what a deathless life would be like. It would be utterly meaningless. No one would get married. No one would have children. No one would try to improve anything. I can't imagine. It would be a life something other than human if we were deathless creatures. You know, Kafka said the meaning of life is that it ends. And it's really true. And it takes that realization. For me, it happened when I was looking into my father's casket. Now, the ironic thing about that is that prior to my father's death, I had stood shoulder to shoulder with people looking into the casket at their loved one's body 1,000 times. And that is not rabbinic hyperbole. I'm not exaggerating. 1,000 times. And I was fine because it was vicarious. You know, I was struck by the idea and the reality that our bodies are only a small part of who we are, that is so much not the person. But other than that, it didn't affect me 1,000 times. And then I'm looking at my own father, and I remember leaning over the casket and looking at my father, and it striking me in a way that none of those 1,000 times before had. And I said to myself, that's what I'm going to look like when I'm dead and my son is bending over my casket.
You know we all think about stuff like that, don't we? Don't you? I do.
The poet Wallace Stevens said, I'm paraphrasing, the beauty of a flower is that it fades. That's why plastic flowers don't move us. Because they have no death, they have no life. And this is not in any way to deny the pain of loss, the power and magnitude of grief. To the contrary, you know, it is really to impel us and ennoble us and inspire us to lead more meaningful and more beautiful lives. Dostoevsky said that his greatest fear, and I think this might be quite powerful for you, Wendy, specifically because of your story. Dostoevsky said his greatest fear was that he would not be worthy of his suffering. Such a powerful idea. Can you live a life that's worthy of what you've been through?
Wayne Dyer said that. He said that as he was on his deathbed.
Talmud says if you are visited by pain, examine your life. And that is not to say that you deserve the pain. It's merely to say that pain, despite it being pain, is also an invitation. You know, my previous book before The Beauty of What Remains was exactly about that. It's The title is More Beautiful Than Before: How Suffering Transforms Us. And in it, I say, if you have to go through hell, don't come out empty-handed. And that's not to say that the hell is worth the beautiful ways in which it changes your life. It's merely to say it is not worth less. Don't allow it to be worth less. Don't allow what you went through in your 20s and 30s to be worthless. The first chapter of that book I just mentioned, More Beautiful Than Before, the first chapter is called When You Must, You Can. And I think that's what you were feeling.
I had told Rabbi Steve about my past and how in my 20s I survived domestic violence, in my 30s financial ruin, almost homelessness, in my 40s great success, in my 50s cancer, then loss, and then my mother passed away as I was fighting my chemo, and I heard the voice of God tell me all would be okay.
I've had a similar experience pretty recently. I was going through something extraordinarily difficult, and I was studying that week's Torah portion because I was going to be teaching the next day. And it was about the 10 plagues, the last of the 10 plagues, including the plague of darkness. And I read this rabbinic commentary that said, the darkness was meant to imply, and it has to do with the Hebrew word in the Torah portion, which I won't get into, but that because of the way it's described, it implied that the real darkness was that no one could move out of his or her own perspective to have empathy for the perspective of another. And the issue I was facing was I was being criticized for having empathy for someone else's situation, someone who had, really done something terrible, and I responded with empathy. And I was being criticized for that. And there I am studying this, and where basically the rabbis are saying in this commentary, the lack of empathy is the plague of darkness. It's a terrible plague. And I felt in that moment, in a sense, and I don't anthropomorphize God, but I felt spoken to. I felt something saying to me, you did the godly thing. Hold your ground. So I have heard so many, like you, stories about things like this. Who am I to dismiss that? Just like I've heard so many stories about people, as I have, feeling the presence of their loved one after their loved one has died. Yeah, so who are we to, judge the experience of another?
The lack of empathy is the plague of darkness. Gee, that should be written in the sky every single day for everyone to be reminded of its importance.
You might recall in The Beauty of What Remains that I often have to counsel people not to miss the rest of a person's life worrying about their death, because that's a very common trap that people fall into. Sometimes people will call me and say things like, my dad's 92. I want to meet with you to talk about him, for the funeral. I said, is your dad okay? Yeah, he's great. I said, all right, all you need to do at this point is make sure you have cemetery property and an advance directive and the phone number for the mortuary. After you have those three things, stop thinking about and worrying about the funeral. I'll tell you something, Wendy, after all these years, 33 years of being a rabbi, I can plan a funeral in 5 minutes. Enjoy his life and stop planning his death. And it's very helpful because it's an easy trap to fall into.
I think it's an interesting viewpoint because it comes from a lot of different eyes.
I would often say to people, I'm 58 years old. My father can't walk and my kids can't stand on their own 2 feet. My wife and I, before COVID, were having dinner with 2 friends our age, and we were talking about our children, and they have lots of issues with theirs, and we have issues with ours. And the husband of the other couple just leaned across the table, looked at the three of us, and he just said, "When you have kids, it never ends." And we all laughed.
There is so much truth in this statement. So much truth.
And I think there's something obviously challenging about that, but beautiful about that I don't, we have these cliches. Life is a journey. It's about the journey, not the destination. This destination thinking that there's some point in life when you are rid of responsibility, anxiety, worry, it never comes. I think that knowing that is really important if you want to lead a meaningful life. I'll tell you a very interesting statistic. Many years ago, a psychologist named William Marston asked a sampling of people, "What are you waiting for?" And he found that 94% of people were in one way or another putting their lives on hold because they were waiting for something to happen, right? Waiting for the mortgage to be paid off, waiting for the kids to move out of the house, waiting to retire, waiting for the vacation. 94% of us are waiting while our lives are just flying by. That is the trap to avoid. And I will say very personally, my father's death gave me the kick in the pants I needed to stop waiting for certain things. I have made the decision about when I'm going to retire. We have started building our dream home in the Mojave Desert. We are different in a good way.
So what are you waiting for? Are you waiting for the voice of God to tell you to change, take a chance, get your shit together?
All religion is a response to finitude. All religion is a response to the fact that our lives are finite, and that's why religion exists. Stephen Hawking said religion is for people who are afraid of the dark. I don't agree. I think religion is for people who are curious about the dark.
I think it's for people who are curious about the light. And that's exactly what I said.
People said to me, "Steve, how could you spend 2 years writing a book about death?" And my answer is, I didn't. I spent 2 years writing a book about life.
The beauty of what remains. It's just truly the greatest gift.
This issue of kind of always being in the meat in the sandwich in life, that there's always someone ahead of us and behind us we need to care for. I think that is life itself. And by the way, I think caring for others is one of the things that gives life meaning. I'm one of 5. When my father went through that 10-year journey with Alzheimer's, we each kind of played to our strengths and accepted our weaknesses. We were a team. And I think that's maybe a way to look at it with your siblings. We're a team, and Wendy's going to do what she's good at, and the others are going to do what they're good at, and somehow it's all going to be enough. Truth is that life is a long journey of responsibility, and that freedom comes and goes and comes and goes and comes and goes, and the opportunity to help another person.
About 15 years ago, my brother's son had a head injury and he passed away, so his organs were donated. It turns out, years later, we find out that who received his heart is actually a good friend of his cousin's, my son's, best friend. Isn't that wild?
And there's also a story in the book about a woman who receives a cornea transplant from her husband after he dies, and she literally ever after sees the world through his eyes. And I see that as a metaphor for our opportunity when our loved ones die, is to see the world through their eyes, to see it for them. I often say at weddings, for example, when the father or mother of the bride or groom has died and the remaining spouse is standing there at the wedding, I will often turn and say to that spouse, "See it for her now. See it for him today." And it's it's very powerful and very real and very true. This beautiful Chinese proverb, which says, if you want to be happy for an hour, take a nap. If you want to be happy for a day, go fishing. If you want to be happy for a month, get married. If you want to be happy for a year, inherit a fortune. If you want to be happy for a lifetime, help another person.
I completely agree with this philosophy, yet I have a difficult time as one of 6 kind of hanging out with my 92-year-old father, because he really kind of just talks about the same thing and gets mad at me. So he's kind of a little bit narcissistic, and I was talking about that.
Approaching death changes nothing. People die exactly the way they live. If your father was a narcissist in life, he's going to be a narcissist in death. And there is nothing you can do about that, other than to realize it and therefore manage your own expectations. Stop leading with your chin. Stop the expecting him to get a new personality because he's 92 years old. The poet Heinrich Heine had this joke about the Jews. He said, the Jews are like everyone else, just more so. So being 92, facing death, it doesn't give you a new personality. It just makes you more so. When facing death is the same as your family when facing life, just more so. And sometimes that's disappointing, and sometimes it's beautiful. But I want to tell you, from a guy who's dealt with over 1,000 grieving families, this is almost always true. So don't set yourself up for disappointment. Your father is today the same person he was 40, 50, and 60 years ago, just more so.
Well, kind of nailed that one right on the head. Just remarkable. It is so true. And it kind of sucks for that reason.
I've learned a lot from sitting with 1,000 families, doing what clergy call the intake meeting, where you sit with a family to talk about their loved one who's died so that you can write a meaningful eulogy, so you can tell the story. And everyone thinks that the rabbi or the priest or the minister or the imam or the best friend writes the eulogy for a person, but it really isn't true. We each are writing our own eulogy every day of our lives. And what I learned through these meetings with families, when we make what I call a big stew of stories, is that it's rarely, if ever, the big things in a person's life that families talk about when they're gone. It's the seemingly unimportant and tiny things that loom large in our hearts when a person is gone. It's not the net worth. It's not the resume. It's not the zip code. It is, he always got up on Sunday mornings to make chocolate chip Mickey Mouse shaped pancakes for me when I was little. It was the way my mom before school would go out in the garage with me and help me build my cage for my pet salamander. It was the sunflower my dad planted underneath my second-story bedroom window so it would grow tall as my window and I would have a flower outside.
Mine is my mother giving me a rag and a can of Pledge and letting me shine the furniture. It truly is.
This comes back so starkly and powerfully if you think about headstones in the cemetery. I spend a lot of time in cemeteries. And despite the fact that we all lead unique lives, there is an extraordinary uniformity of inscriptions on headstones in the cemetery, right? They almost all say exactly the same thing, despite how unique, that our lives are unique. What do they say? At the end of it all, when you have to distill a person's life down to 15 characters and 4 lines, what do we say? Loving wife, mother, grandmother, friend. What ends up in our eulogy is how we live each day with that tiny handful of people, and none of us has more than a tiny handful of people who really, really matter. That engages us in a very powerful exercise of essentialism, right? How to live our lives, what really matters. That's why I called the book The Beauty of What Remains, because that's ultimately what death teaches us to cherish, both about our loved ones who have died and our own lives, to really cherish the beauty of what remains. That's a beautiful and meaningful life.
And it's a really beautiful and meaningful book.
Live your life with the understanding that every day is a blessing, that it's finite, that none of us has forever to hold and cherish and say, I love you to the people who matter. I think that COVID has taught all of this lesson. However, I think it's a lesson that's easily forgotten. You know, when we have the opportunity to return to our previous frenetic and sometimes very shallow lives. You know, hopefully COVID has taught us that a busy life and a meaningful life are not the same thing. Now, can we hold on to that when we have the freedom to return to our default settings?
Maria Shriver says, the wisdom Steve Leder shares in this moving book is an essential part of living a beautiful and meaningful life. Read it and feel inspired. Jenna Bush Hager, she says, Rabbi Steve Leder writes about grief and pain in the beauty of what remains, but also about the joy and love we can find in the most unexpected places. This gorgeous book will provide comfort to many. And I couldn't agree more. You can find The Beauty of What Remains on Amazon. You can find it on Audible. And you can go to steveleder.com. He is actually pretty much all over the place because he is one rockin' rabbi. I'm so grateful to have a conversation with him and for us to be able to share a little bit of our personal journeys together. I hope you enjoyed the StoryView, and I will see you next time. Remember, intro-outro music is by Tom Orsi. This was produced by C-Spot Run Productions, and it was edited and hosted by me, Wendy Cooper. Thanks for listening, and stay safe. And you know you can find my podcasts everywhere you get yours and your other ones. You can also find me on Clubhouse every once in a while. Thanks for listening, everyone.